Hey guys, it's Alex Torelli, and welcome back to the hand of the day. Today's hand comes from Daniel, who's playing a 1-2 no limit cash game, and he finds himself pretty deep stacked here. He's playing 150 big blinds deep. He's got 300 bucks at the table. Gets folded him on the button. He has deuces, decides to make it $7 pre-flop, and hit the small blind calls and the big blind calls. I like this raise size here because you put a lot of pressure on your opponents from the button, and if they're the types of players, especially to just flat call or fold, it's even better of a raise because they're not going to 3-bet you out of the pot, and you put a lot of pressure on them. You're also deep stacked, so you're cutting down on their implied odds to call pre-flop, and you're just putting a lot of pressure right from the get-go. I really like this raise size, Daniel, and good job, props to you. So we go 3 ways to the flop. The flop comes ace-4 deuce with ace-deuce of clubs. So massive flop for us. We flop pretty much the nuts, and there's a flush draw on the board too, and an ace. So it's a good board for our opponents to possibly make a play on, or have a lot of equity, or even hit an ace and have top pair, and we could win a lot of money. So I think that this is a great spot to be betting, and of course it's a great spot to be betting, but I also think it's a good spot to be betting on the bigger side, and Daniel opts to do that again. So props to your bet sizing twice. The pot's 21 bucks. You can see here he bet 15 when it gets checked to him, and I think this is a good spot. I mean, it's a draw heavy board. Your opponents are going to play back at you with any sort of equity. They're going to call with an ace, they're going to call with a flush draw, they might call with 4-5 or 4-3, and there's just a lot of hands that are calling here. They might even call with 5-6 and try and float you or something. So I think it's a really good spot to bet here. You sort of want to build the pot. You're really deep. You don't want them to draw cheaply, and it's just a great bet all around. So good job. The small blind folds and the big blind calls. So we go heads up to the turn, and we're loving it. We have the best hand all the time pretty much, and we're in a great spot to win a lot of money. The turn comes a 10. It's pretty much impossible. This helped our opponent, so another great card for us, and our plan here is to just keep betting away. So our opponent checks, and we go ahead and bet 40 here into 51. Again, on the bigger side, notice his bet sizing here. I think this is really good because we apply a lot of pressure. We don't really want our opponent to get a cheap river card and bust us with a flush draw, or maybe he picked up a pair and a flush draw on the turn. Maybe he has a straight draw and a flush draw on the turn. And we don't really want him to draw cheaply. And if he does have an ace, we could be bluffing ourselves, and we want to apply max pressure on that ace to just put him outside of his comfort zone. We want to build a bigger pot and just make it really tough for him to be in this situation on the turn and the river against us. It makes us harder to play against in general. Some things I tell my private clients is to consider overbetting in this spot here. And I think that's really good because your hand overall is stronger than his. You can have a lot of hands that he can't have. And whenever you're in a situation where you can have the nuts and your opponent can't, it's a really good spot to overbet. He's more worried about your hand than you're worried about his hand. Because of how he played pre-flop and on the flop. So he can't really have a set of aces, he can't have a set of tens. He probably would have check raised a set of fours or deuces if he had those hands, and you didn't, for example. And so his range is really confined to, I mean, even 2-pair he probably would have check raised. So it's really likely your opponent has 1-pair hands and draws. And you could have sets, 2 pairs, and bigger aces. You could have ace-king, your opponent can't have ace-king. So your range just smashes him here. So you should be overbetting a decent amount of the time in this spot because you want to protect the times that you're bluffing, and it just puts your opponent in an impossible spot to play against you with his range. Props to our man here who did make a very big bet, and he got the idea right. It's a really good spot to make a big bet. So good job continuing with that, applying max pressure throughout the hand, and just making it tough for your opponents to continue. That being said, we made it 40. Our opponent calls. Now we're set up to win a huge pot on the river if it blanks. If the club comes, I think we're going to have to check back here, and we can't really continue betting. The club would complete too many of our hands, and it would make it complete too many of our opponent's hands. So the club makes it less likely our opponent's going to pay us off with just an ace, and it also makes it so much more likely that we hit a flush. So I just think betting on a club is a little thin. Maybe we could bet, depending on our opponent, we could bet like half pot or something to protect our range. But you know, we're really hoping for no club here, and we're going to make another huge bet and try and win a big pot. So that's our plan going into the river. And I think another thing that's really important that I encourage you guys to do, it's something I encourage all my students to do, is to have a plan for the hand before the cards come. So you know on the turn or on the flop how you're going to play all the possible cards that come on later streets, so that you don't find yourself in a precarious spot, and you have a plan ahead of time to know how to make the best decision possible no matter what happens. That way you can just focus on decision making and not be worried about emotionally what cards come and how those things affect you. So I think that's really, really important to have here too, and it sounds like Daniel has that all set up. Props to him again, because he's playing his bet sizes right. He's doing everything right here to set himself up to win a killer pot on the river. So the river comes an offsuit queen, which is an excellent card for us. This could have made our opponent have two pair, or maybe he has, it's a complete blank, so it's unlikely this card helped our opponent's hand, and he might still think we're bluffing. He might pay us off with an ace here. I mean, it didn't really change much about the possible hands we could have. We either have a made hand before or we don't. So this is a great card for us, and he has a little more than a pot-sized bet left. And so we could either be, shoving all in here or betting really, really big. Again, this is why, going back to the turn, maybe overbetting would be good, because you set it up for a river shove, and it's really a tough spot for your opponent. Anyway, our opponent goes out and bets $100 here, which is super strange. He should be checking here all the time. So when he bets, it's a little awkward of a way to play his hand. It's a little too big of a bet to be a blocking bet. If he bet something like 40, you might think he wants to get a cheap showdown with like ace-jack or something where he's unsure about what to do. He doesn't want you to make a big bet, so he bets himself. And you guys have seen that before. It's kind of weird. But when he bets 100 here, it's not really a blocking bet. He bet pretty much most of his stack. And so he bet a lot of his stack relative to the pot, too. That's important. He bet a big relative to the pot. So I'm thinking here now, when he bets this big, that he has something for value. Maybe he had ace-queen on the river. Maybe he has ace-10, and he wants to get value out of his hand, or even something like ace-4. But I feel like it's always a value bet here. It's just a really weird spot to be bluffing. He might have even backdoored like queen 10 or something like that. But the point is, how do we react to this bet, right? Now that we know what it's likely that our opponent has, I think this is a clear shove. I mean, you only are losing to higher sets, which are pretty much impossible how he played the hand, and king jack of clubs specifically, which should be check raising the river. So I just don't see any reason for better hands to bet that are absolute nutted hands from his point of view. He should be check raising those, because he could either get value when you're bluffing, or he could get value when you have a monster. So I just don't see any reason to bet here from his point of view with an absolute nutted hand. And I would always shove here to get value from his two pairs or his blocking bets. Anyway, we go on to just call here, which I think was the one mistake Daniel made in the hand. I think it's just too much value here for your hand to not get max value and go all in. But that being said, Daniel was right. He called. He was right in the sense that he just called. He lost the minimum. His opponent had king jack of clubs, which is a brutal beat. But I think long term you're missing some value here by not shoving. Anyway, that's it. Sometimes you play the hand the best way possible. You do everything right, and boom, boom, runner comes. You lose anyway. Focus on decision making. Don't worry about what cards come, and just let the money roll in long term. That's how you win. All right, guys, that's it for the hand of the day. I hope you liked it, and if you want to see more of these videos, you want to watch more hands of the days, click right here, click on subscribe, and I will see you guys next week. Cheers.